3 terrifying true Halloween night horror stories. Welcome back to Dark Whispers, where the shadows speak and the truth is more terrifying than fiction. I'm your host, and tonight is special. Because what I'm about to share with you didn't happen in some distant past or forgotten place. These events occurred on Halloween night, when the veil between worlds grows thin, and the darkness creeps just a little bit closer. The 3 stories you're about to hear are real. They happened to real people on real Halloween nights when trick-or-treaters walked the streets and jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches. But behind the masks and costumes, something far more sinister was lurking. In our first story, a college student's Halloween party takes a nightmarish turn when an uninvited guest refuses to leave, and refuses to reveal what's beneath his mask. Our second tale follows a young mother who discovers that not all trick-or-treaters are children looking for candy. And finally, you'll hear about a group of friends whose Halloween tradition of exploring abandoned buildings leads them to encounter something that should have stayed buried. So turn off your lights, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't answer if someone knocks. Because after tonight, you might never look at Halloween the same way again. And if you're brave enough to make it through all 3 stories, make sure you subscribe to Dark Whispers and hit that notification bell, because there are far more shadows to explore, and the darkness has so many more secrets to share. Let's begin. Story 1. The Uninvited. This first story comes from a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who experienced this terrifying Halloween night back in 2019 when she was a senior at a university in upstate New York. Sarah had always loved Halloween. The decorations, the costumes, the creative energy that seemed to pulse through the air during October. So when her roommate Jessica suggested throwing a Halloween party at their off-campus house, Sarah immediately agreed. They lived in an old Victorian rental with 2 other roommates, perfect for a spooky celebration. They spent weeks planning. Decorations covered every surface. Fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, strobing lights, and a fog machine they'd found on sale. They sent invitations to their friend group, maybe 40 people total, and made it costume mandatory. Sarah decided to go as a classic witch, complete with a pointed hat and flowing black dress. October 31st arrived with unseasonably cold weather. By 8 p.m., their house was packed with zombies, superheroes, movie characters, and creatures Sarah couldn't even identify. Music pounded through the speakers, and the fog machine created an appropriately eerie atmosphere. Everything was perfect. Around 10:30, Sarah was in the kitchen refilling the punch bowl when Jessica grabbed her arm. Her roommate's face had gone pale beneath her vampire makeup. "Did you invite someone in a plague doctor costume?" Jessica asked, her voice tight. Sarah thought for a moment. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" "There's someone in the living room wearing a plague doctor mask and costume. Full black robes, the whole thing. But Sarah, he's just standing there. He's been standing in the corner for the past 20 minutes. Not drinking, not talking to anyone. Just standing, staring. It's creeping everyone out." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she tried to rationalize it. It was Halloween. People were supposed to be creepy. Maybe it's someone's friend we don't know? You know how these parties go. Friends bring friends. "I asked around," Jessica said. "No one knows who invited him. And Sarah, his mask. It looks old. Really old. Not like the costume store versions. It looks authentic." Despite her unease, Sarah decided to approach the situation directly. She walked into the living room and immediately spotted the figure. Jessica was right. The costume was disturbingly realistic. The plague doctor stood motionless near the fireplace, his long black robes hanging perfectly still despite the movement of the crowd around him. The mask was leather, worn and cracked with age, with those characteristic glass eye holes and the long beak-like protrusion. Sarah approached, forcing a smile. "Hey there. Great costume. I don't think we've met. I'm Sarah, one of the hosts." The figure didn't respond. Didn't move. Through the glass eye holes, Sarah could see nothing but darkness. Are you okay?" She tried again, now feeling dozens of eyes on them as other partygoers noticed the confrontation. Still nothing. The room had grown quieter, the music seeming distant. Then, slowly, the plague doctor's head tilted to the side. Just slightly. The movement was wrong somehow, too smooth, too controlled. Sarah's throat went dry. Listen, if you're not going to interact with anyone, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. This is a private party. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the plague doctor raised one gloved hand and pointed directly at Sarah. Held it there. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. That's it, she said, her voice cracking. You need to go. Now. She turned to find her other roommate, Marcus, who was over 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. She explained the situation, and Marcus, along with his friend Devin, agreed to escort the unwanted guest out. Sarah watched as the two large men approached the plague doctor. Party's over for you, buddy, Marcus said firmly. Let's go. The plague doctor didn't resist as they each took an arm and guided him toward the front door. But as they passed Sarah, the figure turned his head toward her again. And then from behind the mask came a sound that made Sarah's blood run cold. Laughter. Not normal laughter. It was dry, rasping, ancient sounding. It echoed wrongly, as if coming from somewhere far away and very close at the same time. Marcus and Devin practically threw him out onto the front porch and slammed the door, locking it. The party resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. People left earlier than planned, the fun energy replaced by unease. By midnight, only Sarah, Jessica, Marcus, and their other roommate Claire remained, cleaning up the aftermath of the party. That was weird as hell, Marcus said, stuffing plastic cups into a trash bag. Did you guys see his hands when we grabbed him? They felt cold. Like really cold. Through the gloves. Can we not talk about it? Claire said, looking nervous. Let's just clean up and forget it happened. They worked in relative silence, and by 1 a.m., the house was mostly restored to normal. Sarah was exhausted as she trudged upstairs to her bedroom, ready to wash off her makeup and collapse into bed. She opened her door, flicked on the light, and froze. Sitting on her bed was the plague doctor mask. Sarah's scream brought the others running. They crowded into her doorway, staring at the impossible object resting on her pillow. How the hell did that get in here? Marcus demanded. We locked all the doors after we threw him out. We've all been downstairs together. Check the windows, Jessica said, her voice shaky. They searched Sarah's room frantically. Every window was locked from the inside. There was no possible way someone could have entered. Maybe he left it behind somehow? Claire suggested weakly. Maybe it was in the house already and we didn't notice? But Sarah knew better. She had been in her room before the party started. That mask had not been there. Marcus volunteered to stay the night on their couch, and Devin returned to keep him company, both of them uncomfortable with leaving the women alone. No one slept well that night. Sarah kept her light on, jumping at every small sound. The next morning, Sarah examined the mask in daylight. It was genuine leather, old enough that it had a musty smell. Inside, barely visible, were initials carved into the leather. TM. And a date. 1636. That was impossible. Plague doctors hadn't even been used in America in the 1600s. But more disturbing was that if the date was real, this mask would be nearly 400 years old. Sarah wanted nothing to do with it. She put it in a garbage bag, then another, and threw it in the outside trash bin. She watched the garbage truck take it away 2 days later and felt a wave of relief. But the relief didn't last. 3 nights after Halloween, Sarah was awakened by the sound of tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Rhythmic and persistent. It was coming from her window. She lay frozen in bed, her heart racing. They lived on the 2nd floor. There was no tree close enough to touch the window. No ledge. Nothing. Tap, tap, tap. Slowly, Sarah turned her head toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but backlit by the streetlight outside, she could see a shadow. The shape was distinct and unmistakable, the long beak, the wide-brimmed hat. The plague doctor was at her window. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The tapping continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped. The shadow remained for a moment longer, then disappeared. Sarah didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, she discovered something that made her stomach drop. On the outside windowsill, where the figure had been, someone had scratched something into the paint. 3 words, "I'm still invited." Sarah immediately called her parents and left school for a week, too terrified to stay in that house. When she finally returned, she moved to a different bedroom on the opposite side of the house. She never used that room again. But the strange occurrences didn't stop entirely. Objects would move in the house. Small things easy to dismiss as forgetfulness. Keys would appear in different places than where they'd been left. Doors they remembered locking would be open in the morning. And sometimes late at night, Sarah would hear it. That dry, rasping laughter. Distant but clear. They discovered from the landlord that the house had a history. In the 1800s, it had briefly served as a quarantine house during a cholera outbreak. People had died there. The landlord didn't know much more, but Sarah became convinced that something from that dark period had never left. And somehow their Halloween party had awakened it, or invited it in. Sarah graduated and moved away, but she told me that to this day she refuses to celebrate Halloween. She doesn't wear costumes. She doesn't answer the door. And she never, ever looks at plague doctor imagery. Because on one Halloween night, something wearing that mask came to her party uninvited. And despite every attempt to make it leave, part of it remained. Still invited. Still watching. Still waiting in the shadows of that old Victorian house. Story 2, The Trick-or-Treater. Our second story takes place in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Oregon and comes from a man named David Shin, recounting what happened to his wife, Amanda, on Halloween night in 2017. David and Amanda had moved into their first house just 6 months earlier. It was a modest 3-bedroom home in a family-friendly neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns. They had a 2-year-old daughter named Lily, and Amanda was excited to experience their first Halloween in their new home. David worked as a nurse and had to pull a night shift that Halloween, which he felt terrible about. Amanda assured him she'd be fine handling trick-or-treaters on her own. She'd prepared everything: 2 huge bowls of candy, decorative lights on the porch, a smiling jack-o'-lantern by the door. Lily was dressed as a tiny bumblebee, and Amanda had taken her around to a few neighbors' houses before dark, getting the toddler familiar with the tradition. David left for work at 6 p.m., just as the first trick-or-treaters were beginning to appear on the streets. Amanda waved goodbye from the doorway, Lily on her hip, both of them smiling. The first hour was exactly as Amanda expected. Groups of kids came by, superheroes, princesses, monsters. She complimented every costume and dropped handfuls of candy into plastic pumpkins and pillowcases. Lily was delighted by each group of visitors, squealing with joy at the older kids. By 8 p.m. Lily was exhausted and Amanda took her upstairs for bed. After reading 2 storybooks and singing a lullaby, Lily was asleep and Amanda returned downstairs. The frequency of trick-or-treaters had slowed down, but she left the porch light on, expecting a few stragglers. She settled on the couch with a cup of tea and her phone, half watching a movie. Around 8:45 the doorbell rang. Amanda grabbed the candy bowl and opened the door with a smile, expecting to see a few older kids trying to squeeze in some last-minute candy collecting. But only one figure stood on her porch. It was a child, at least it appeared to be a child. Small, maybe the size of a 7 or 8-year-old. They wore a simple costume, a dirty white sheet with holes cut out for eyes. A classic ghost. But there was something off about it. The sheet was genuinely dirty, not artfully distressed. It had brown stains and tears. And the child stood completely still, not bouncing or fidgeting the way kids usually did. No parent waited on the sidewalk. No other children stood nearby. "Well, hello there," Amanda said, trying to shake off her unease. "Great costume. Very traditional." The child didn't respond. Didn't move. Didn't hold out a bag for candy. Amanda laughed nervously. "Cat got your tongue? Well, here you go." She held out a handful of candy bars toward the small ghost. The child still didn't move. Through the eye holes in the sheet, Amanda could see nothing but darkness. "Are you okay?" Amanda asked, now genuinely concerned. "Are your parents nearby?" Then the child spoke. The voice was wrong, too deep, too hollow. Like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Can I come inside?" Amanda felt ice water flood her veins. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was a child. Maybe a child with a voice condition or someone playing a prank. "I don't think that's a good idea, sweetheart," Amanda said as gently as she could. Why don't you take some candy and I can help you find your parents? Can I come inside? The child repeated in exactly the same tone. Exactly the same inflection. No, Amanda said more firmly. Where are your parents? The sheet moved slightly as if the child beneath had tilted their head. Can I come inside? This time, Amanda noticed something that made her stomach turn. The child's feet were bare. In 40-degree weather on a cold October night, this child had no shoes. And their feet, something was wrong with them. They were gray. Not just pale, but gray like old meat. I'm going to close the door now, Amanda said, backing up. You need to go home. She started to push the door shut, but the child spoke again louder now. Can I come inside? The voice boomed, rattling the windows. Amanda slammed the door and locked it, her hands shaking. Through the peephole, she could see the small figure still standing there, perfectly motionless. Amanda grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but what would she say? A child in a ghost costume was asking to come inside? They'd think she was crazy. She watched through the peephole for 5 minutes. The child never moved. Finally, Amanda called out through the door. I'm calling the police if you don't leave. As if released by those words, the child turned, a smooth, unnatural motion, and walked down the porch steps. But they didn't walk toward the street. They walked to the side of the house, disappearing around the corner toward the backyard. Amanda's heart stopped. She ran to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard, arriving just in time to see the small sheet-covered figure standing at the back door, facing it. Her back door. Even from a distance, through the darkness, Amanda could hear it. Can I come inside? The voice carried clearly through the glass, loud and hollow. Amanda ran around the first floor, checking every window, every door, making sure everything was locked. She turned on every light in the house. Then she ran upstairs to Lily's room, locked herself inside with her daughter, and called David. David, something's wrong, she whispered frantically. There's someone outside the house. A child, but not a child. They keep asking to come inside. David immediately said he'd leave work and come home, protocol be damned. Call the police, Amanda. Right now. Amanda did. She explained that someone was on her property, possibly a child, and she felt threatened. The dispatcher said they'd send an officer right away. While she waited, Amanda heard it. From directly below Lily's room, from the first floor. Knock. 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 Can I come inside? It was at the front door again. Then, from another part of the house, the back door. Can I come inside? 2 voices. Both identical. Both hollow. Amanda clutched Lily, who miraculously remained asleep, and tried not to scream. She looked out Lily's bedroom window, which faced the front yard, and her blood turned to ice. There were 5 of them. 5 small sheet-covered figures, all standing in her front yard, all facing the house. Perfectly still. Perfectly spaced. Like sentinels. Can I come inside? They said in unison, the sound reverberating through the night. Amanda couldn't breathe. She turned on Lily's bedroom light and kept every light in the house burning, as if light alone could protect them. The police arrived 12 minutes later, though it felt like hours. Amanda watched from the window as the patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. The officer got out, looked around, and approached the front door. The children were gone. Amanda let the officer inside, trying not to sound hysterical as she explained what happened. The officer was professional and kind, a middle-aged woman named Officer Reeves. She checked the perimeter of the house, finding nothing unusual. Are you sure it wasn't just kids playing pranks? Officer Reeves asked gently. Halloween brings out some weird behavior. I know what I saw, Amanda insisted. Their feet were gray. Their voices were wrong. And there were 5 of them at the end. Officer Reeves agreed to file a report and promised to have patrol cars drive by the house regularly throughout the night. She also mentioned that there had been no other calls about suspicious children in the area. David arrived 20 minutes later, and Amanda collapsed into his arms, finally allowing herself to cry. They didn't sleep that night. David checked the locks 100 times. They both jumped at every sound. And when morning came, Amanda found something that proved she hadn't imagined it. On the back porch, in the dust that had accumulated there, were dozens of small footprints, child-sized. barefoot. They circled the back door, overlapping and crisscrossing, as if many children had paced there for hours. But what made Amanda's stomach drop was the pattern they formed when viewed from above. The footprints, all together, created a spiral. And at the center of the spiral, scratched into the wood of the door, were 3 words: "Let us in." David took photos and called the police again. Officer Reeves returned, clearly unsettled by the evidence. She admitted she'd never seen anything like it. In the days that followed, Amanda did research. She discovered that their neighborhood was built on land that had previously been part of a county children's home, essentially an orphanage, that operated from 1920 to 1955. The building had burned down in a fire in 1952, killing 8 children who'd been locked in their dormitory room for misbehavior. The home never recovered from the tragedy and closed 3 years later. Amanda learned that it was a Halloween tradition among some of the orphanage children to go into town on Halloween night begging for scraps, as the orphanage barely had enough food. Many of them didn't have proper shoes or costumes. They would cover themselves with whatever fabric they could find, often old sheets. And they would go door to door asking the same question: "Can we come inside?" Most families would give them food or old clothes. But some, Amanda learned with growing horror, would refuse them. Would send them back into the cold, hungry and forgotten. The year of the fire, 8 children had been locked in their room as punishment on Halloween night. They banged on the door, begging to be let out, asking the same question over and over: "Can we come inside?" No one had let them in. They'd burned to death behind that locked door. Amanda and David sold the house 6 months later. They couldn't stay there, not after that night. Not knowing what lingered in that ground, what had been awakened by the lights and the candy and the celebration of a holiday those children had never gotten to truly enjoy. Amanda told me that she still celebrates Halloween for Lily's sake, but she never, ever opens the door after dark. And if she hears a voice that sounds wrong, a voice that comes from somewhere deep and hollow, she turns off every light, locks every door and waits for dawn. Because on one Halloween night, Amanda learned that some trick-or-treaters aren't looking for candy. They're looking for something they were denied long ago. They're looking for warmth, for shelter, for someone to finally, after all these years, say yes. But Amanda knows better than to invite them in. Because some guests, once welcome, never leave. Story 3: The Abandoned Asylum. Our final story is perhaps the most disturbing, and it comes from multiple sources. A group of 4 friends who experienced the same nightmare on Halloween night 2021 in Pennsylvania. I've compiled their accounts to give you the complete picture of what happened that night. The 4 friends were Tyler, Jake, Madison, and Olivia, all in their mid-20s and longtime friends who had maintained a Halloween tradition since high school. Every Halloween they would explore an abandoned building, an old hospital, a closed factory, a forgotten schoolhouse. They documented their explorations on social media, gaining a modest following who enjoyed the spooky atmosphere and historical research they provided. For Halloween 2021, Tyler had found what he called the crown jewel of abandoned locations, the Westbrook State Hospital, a massive psychiatric asylum that had closed in 1994 after decades of scandal and mistreatment allegations. The building had sat abandoned for 27 years, slowly being reclaimed by nature. It was technically illegal to enter, but the fence around the property had deteriorated enough that determined urban explorers could find a way in. The group met at 7 p.m. in the gravel parking lot of the abandoned complex. The main building loomed above them, 4 stories of dark brick, broken windows, and decay. Ivy crawled up the walls and trees grew through cracks in the concrete. It was perfect. They came prepared. Flashlights, cameras, batteries, first aid kit, and a basic knowledge of the building's layout from research online. They'd learned that Westbrook had once housed over 800 patients at its peak, with a particularly dark history surrounding its 4th floor, which had been reserved for the most violent patients and those subjected to experimental treatments. Tyler led the way through a broken window on the ground floor. Inside, the smell hit them immediately: mold, decay, and something else they couldn't quite identify. Something organic and wrong. The interior was exactly what they'd hoped for: long corridors lined with empty rooms, peeling paint revealing layers of institutional green and yellow beneath. Gurneys lay overturned in hallways. Files and paperwork were scattered everywhere, patient names long since faded or obscured. For the first hour, everything was perfect. They documented room after room, communal bathrooms with rows of toilets and no privacy dividers, padded cells with scratch marks on the walls, an old hydrotherapy room with a terrifying metal tub. Madison found a room full of patient artwork, crayon drawings and paintings that ranged from childlike to genuinely disturbing. They photographed everything. Around 8:30 they reached the stairwell leading to the upper floors. Jake suggested they skip the 4th floor. It was structurally unsound according to reports, but Tyler insisted they at least take a look. After all, that's where the most intense history had occurred. "We came here for the full experience," Tyler said. "Besides, we'll be careful. We won't stay long." They climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step. The stairwell was pitch black except for their flashlight beams, and the sound of their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the building itself was amplifying every noise. The 4th floor was worse than anything they'd seen below. The air was heavier, thicker. The smell was stronger. And there was something else, a feeling of being watched, of presence. All 4 of them felt it immediately. "This is wrong," Olivia said quietly. "We shouldn't be up here." "Just a few rooms," Tyler promised. "Then we'll go back down." The hallway stretched before them, darker than the others somehow. Madison's flashlight flickered, which she blamed on the battery, though she'd just installed a fresh one. They passed door after door, most of them closed. The rooms they could see into were stripped bare. No furniture, no belongings, just empty spaces with barred windows. But one room at the end of the hall had its door wide open. "That one," Tyler said, drawn to it. "Let's check that one." As they approached, Jake stopped suddenly. "Do you guys hear that?" They all fell silent, listening. And yes, there was something. A sound like whispers. Dozens of overlapping whispers, too quiet to make out individual words but unmistakable. "It's probably just wind through the broken windows," Madison said, but her voice shook. They reached the open doorway and pointed their flashlights inside. The room was different from the others. It still had a bed, a metal frame with a thin, stained mattress. On the walls, someone had written things. Hundreds of words and phrases, scratched or written in what looked like it could be blood. "Help me. Let me out. They're listening. The doctor knows. Save US." And in the center of the far wall, larger than the rest, "They never left." "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed. "This is seriously messed up." Tyler walked further into the room, filming with his camera. "This is incredible. Look at all of this. This is exactly what..." He stopped mid-sentence. "Tyler?" Madison asked. Tyler was staring at something in the corner of the room, his flashlight beam fixed on one spot. The others followed his gaze. In the corner, just barely visible in the shadows beyond their lights, something was crouched. A shape. Human-sized but hunched over, facing the wall. "Who's there?" Jake called out, his voice cracking. "This is private property. We're leaving." The shape didn't respond. Didn't move. Is that a person?" Olivia whispered. Tyler took a step closer, raising his camera. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need..." The figure moved. Not the way a person moves. It unfolded, rising from its crouch in segments, joint by joint, as if it wasn't quite sure how human movement worked. It stayed facing the wall. "Run!" Madison screamed. They bolted from the room and ran down the hallway toward the stairs. Behind them they heard it, footsteps. Not running but walking. Fast, deliberate. And impossibly, the footsteps seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Tyler reached the stairwell first and started down, the others right behind him. But when Madison looked back, her flashlight caught something that stopped her heart. The hallway was full of them. Dozens of figures in hospital gowns, standing in doorways, emerging from rooms, filling the corridor. All of them facing the fleeing group. All of them perfectly still except for their heads, which tracked the group's movement in perfect synchronization. Then they all smiled. Madison saw it in the sweep of her flashlight. Every figure, all at once, smiled the same too-wide smile. She ran faster, nearly falling down the stairs. They burst through the second-floor doorway, planning to exit through the ground floor, but Tyler skidded to a stop. "Which way?" he gasped. "Which way did we come in?" The corridors all looked the same in the dark. They'd gotten turned around. "There." Olivia pointed to a corridor that looked familiar. They ran, their flashlight beams bouncing wildly. Behind them, the sound of footsteps multiplied. Not running, walking. Come. Patient. Like they had all the time in the world. Jake looked back and immediately wished he hadn't. The figures were following, still walking, still smiling, and now he could see them more clearly. They were wrong. Their movements were jerky, mechanical. Their eyes didn't blink. And their smiles revealed too many teeth, far more than a human mouth should contain. "They're not human," Jake said, his voice breaking. "They're not fucking human." They rounded a corner and spotted it, the window they'd entered through. Tyler reached it first and practically dove through, cutting his arm on broken glass but not caring. The others followed, tumbling out onto the overgrown grass outside. But the nightmare wasn't over. They ran toward the parking lot, but Madison realized with horror that the figures were at the windows now. Every window on every floor. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All standing at the windows watching. Smiling. And then, from the building, came a sound that would haunt all four of them for the rest of their lives. Laughter. Not individual laughter, but a chorus. Hundreds of voices laughing in perfect unison. The sound was so loud it seemed to vibrate in their chests, to penetrate their bones. They reached their cars, fumbling with keys, and Tyler couldn't get his door unlocked. His hands were shaking too badly. Jake ran over and helped him, finally getting the door open. They peeled out of the parking lot, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, Tyler saw the building recede into darkness. But he could still see them, silhouettes in every window, still watching, still smiling. The laughter followed them for a full mile down the road before finally fading away. They didn't speak much on the drive back to town. What was there to say? They'd all seen it, all experienced it. There was no explaining it away, no rational excuse. When they reviewed their footage later, most of it was corrupted, digital artifacts and distortion making it unwatchable. But a few clips remained clear, including one that made them all sick to their stomachs. In Tyler's footage of the room, when he'd first spotted the figure in the corner, the camera had caught something else. Something none of them had seen at the time. In the doorway just at the edge of the frame, another figure had been standing. Right behind them. Close enough to touch. It had been there the entire time they were in the room, standing silently behind them, watching. And in the final frame before the video corrupted, just as they'd started to run, the figure had raised one hand and waved goodbye. The group agreed never to speak publicly about what they'd experienced that night. Their social media channels went dark. They deleted their accounts. Their Halloween tradition was over. But Tyler told me something else. Something he hasn't told the others because he doesn't want to frighten them more than they already are. He still hears it sometimes late at night when he's alone. That laughter. Distant but clear. And sometimes when he's falling asleep he feels it, a presence in the corner of his room. Watching. Waiting. Because on Halloween night 2021, in an abandoned asylum, four friends discovered that some buildings aren't empty. Some places hold on to their residents long after death. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The Westbrook State Hospital burned down mysteriously 6 months after their visit. The fire department said it started on the 4th floor, though the building had no electricity and no obvious source of ignition. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was completely engulfed. The fire chief reported that the strangest thing about it was the sounds they heard coming from the building as it burned. It sounded, he said, like hundreds of people. Laughing. 3 stories. 3 Halloween nights. 3 encounters with something that shouldn't exist, yet does. Sarah and her uninvited guest that refused to leave. Amanda and the children who would never stop asking to come inside. And Tyler, Jake, Madison, and Olivia, who learned that some places hold on to their darkness long after the lights go out. These stories are real. The names have been changed to protect the people involved, but the events happened. On Halloween nights, when we celebrate the spooky and the supernatural, when we dress up as monsters and ghosts, real darkness can slip through. Real terrors can knock on your door. real nightmares can follow you home. So tonight, when the sun goes down and the trick-or-treaters start their rounds, remember these stories. Look closely at the masks people wear. Are you sure there's a face beneath? Listen carefully to the voices at your door. Do they sound quite right? And if you're thinking about exploring that abandoned building, that forgotten place where tragedy occurred, ask yourself if you're ready for what might still be waiting there. Because Halloween isn't just a night for pretending to be scared. Sometimes it's a night when the pretending stops. Thank you for joining me for these 3 terrifying true Halloween night horror stories. If you made it through all 3, you're braver than most. If you enjoyed this journey into darkness, please subscribe to Dark Whispers, hit that like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story from the shadows. Share your own Halloween experiences in the comments below. But be warned, we might feature your story in a future episode. And if you hear something strange tonight, if you see something that doesn't quite fit, remember, you're not alone in the dark. You're just alone with whatever else is there. Until next time, stay safe, lock your doors, and remember, the scariest monsters are the ones that are real. This is Dark Whispers signing off. Sweet dreams, if you can.